Welcome back to Plato's Republic. We are in the middle of Book 9 currently. If you're just joining us, check out the description. I'll have a link to the full playlist where you can start at Book 1 and get here the old-fashioned way. What did we talk about in the previous part of Book 9? We were finishing up our ontology of cities. Remember, we had aristocracy devolves into timocracy, devolves into oligarchy, devolves into democracy, devolves into tyranny. And similarly, you got great-grandpa, aristocrat, king man, begets the timocratic man, begets the oligarchic man, begets the democratic man, begets the tyrannical man. And then the most miserable person of all is the tyrannical man who becomes an actual tyrant. And I think I didn't offer a very clear explanation at the end of the last video, and as I was editing it, I realized it was a lot more obvious than I was making it. The tyrannical man, or the man with the tyrannical soul, is ruled by his appetites. So this is the argument against Glaucon's argument from Book 2. So you remember Glaucon was saying, why don't you just pretend to be just and actually be unjust, and you'll be the happiest man there is? Like, you're doing whatever you want on the side. Nobody knows that you're, cheating on your taxes, hiring a lot of prostitutes or whatever it is. And Socrates' argument boils down to that person's ultimately not happy. Like, that is a miserable person who is just using society in order to feed his own appetites. And therefore, that's why he's not a happy person. So although it sounds cool just to be the most unjust person and screwing other people over and nobody knows and you get all these honors, kind of deep down you're just a sad, miserable, alone human being. And he specifically says the tyrannical person loses his friends, and when he becomes a tyrant in the society, he's got to kill all of his close advisors who are telling him that he's not living up to his campaign promises. And so he's just sad and alone in his big tyrant palace. And similarly, he's just kills off all the parts of his soul that I think made him interesting. And so he's just lives a miserable life because he just can't help himself. He's not living a life ruled by reason. And so I think that actually does provide kind of a neat end to this argument. Or kind of like that's another satisfying resolution that we have here, and just essentially offering a psychological argument that you're not going to be happy living as an unjust person, and that just has to do with how your brain is built. Although it looks cool on paper, and you watch Scarface and you're rooting for Al Pacino, and at the end of the day, that's not a happy person. You're not going to be happy doing that either. So I'll probably get back to the esoteric reading a bit later. I kind of want to finish this argument fully. So where we are now, he gave a complete description of the tyrannical soul and talked about how, his parents were permissive, so he started partying in high school. And then his friends kind of got him into harder stuff, and then he kind of wasted all of it, and then he kind of needed more and more money and to feed more and more passions, and so ultimately he starts just wandering the streets and killing people. So it got pretty dark there, and then that's quickly led us to conclude that that's not a very happy person. But the most wretched of all is if that very person becomes a tyrant. So there are a couple, if that person doesn't become a tyrant, usually they want to become a tyrant somewhere else. So it's you got somebody here who just wants to go join ISIS or something because they read that ISIS was doing all this, violence, and they want to get in on that. So I think that would be the closest thing you have to a modern day analogy. And so where we left the story, Socrates had announced that the son of Ariston, which nominally refers to Glaucon here, but also could refer to Plato. So I think that may have been a subtle little joke on Plato's part, saying the son of Ariston now accepts the argument that the unjust man is also a very unhappy man. And maybe that is Plato accepting that argument. It's been kind of it's been difficult, I think, to get a real read on what Plato's thinking. He's had a lot of little jokes here and there, some internal contradictions, especially when he's talking about the narrative structures and getting rid of actors who can imitate a lot of different people well at the same time that he's like imitating people in his own prose. So it is just this sort of like multi-layered, mysterious text in a lot of ways. A friend of mine I was talking to, this is one of his favorite books, and he said it's an endless whirlpool. It's like Michelangelo's David. You could just stare into it forever and just keep finding new meanings, new aspects, and just continue to be mesmerized by it. So I really love that image. So where we are now, so we've finished. Sort of. So we've given a demonstration, or Socrates has given a demonstration of why the tyrannical man is miserable. He announces that the son of Ariston agrees with him, and then he says, well, actually I have a second demonstration of the same point too. And so we'll see where that goes. Usually, like, if you have to prove something in two different ways, it means that like each individual proof isn't very good. Like, you're not actually confident in your first proof, so you have the second proof. But then if the second proof was good, you wouldn't need the first proof. So at least that's kind of the way it is. And like in mathematics, you only need to prove something once. You don't need a million different proofs of the same thing. Unless you're in a geometry class and like proving the Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to see this other demonstration of why the tyrannical man is so miserable. And then we'll be finished with book 9. And I have no idea what's waiting for us in book 10. So here we go. Back to book 9. And Socrates was saying, yeah, well then, that is one of our demonstrations, but look at the second one and see if you think there's anything in it. Okay, so we're going to prove the tyrannical man is miserable in another way. Glaucon, what is it? Socrates, in just the way a city is divided into 3 classes, the soul of each person is also divided in 3. That is the reason I think there is another demonstration. Okay, so, and I think this is the same division we had before with, like, rational, spirited, and appetites. Glaucon, what is it? Socrates, the following. It seems to me that the 3 also have 3 kinds of pleasure, one peculiar to each. The same holds of appetites and kinds of rule. How do you mean? One element, we say, is that with which a person learns. Another, that with which he feels anger. So I think it's the rational element you learn with, the spirited element you get angry with. As for the third, because it is multiform, appetites, we had no one special name for it, but named it after the greatest and strongest thing it has in it. I mean, we called it the appetitive element because of the intensity of its appetites for food, drink, sex, and all the things that go along with them. We also called it the money-loving element, because such appetites are most easily satisfied by means of money. Yeah, that's right. There was some confusion, at least that I have, because when we're talking about the oligarchic man, we're like, oh, he's ruled by appetites for money. And then I thought it was because he wanted to, have food, drink, and sex. But then it's like, no, he actually doesn't like to spend his money. He just likes money in itself. So I don't know if there's some tension there or not. If they just like, I mean, maybe at the end of the day, it's all dopamine. Whether you're looking at your bank account going up, or like your karma points on Reddit, or whatever, your food or drink or sex, it's all the same mental mechanisms. All right, we'll look at the note on money-loving element. Nah, nothing useful. Okay, and we were right, says Glaucon. Socrates, so, if we said its pleasure and love are for profit, wouldn't that best bring it together under one heading for the purposes of our argument and make clear to us what we mean when we speak of this part of the soul? Its pleasure and love. Okay, so profit is what we're going to call it now, I guess. And would we be right in calling it money-loving and profit-loving? Okay, I don't know how eating food is a profit. I guess it's sort of like, maybe in economic theory, it's like you get utility from it, so it's your kind of consumer profit. He's ahead of his time once again, perhaps. Glaucon, I think so anyway. Socrates, what about the spirited element? don't we say that its whole aim is always mastery, victory, and high repute? Certainly. Then wouldn't it strike the right note for us to call it victory-loving and honor-loving? Okay, so we're renaming things here, and there's always something a little fishy when we're renaming things, because Socrates tries to kind of change our minds about things by giving them new names. And, for instance, the mothers and fathers and sons and daughters in the ideal society were like, oh yeah, if any kid is born 9 months after you had sex, then like that kid is your son or daughter. And that was kind of change your mind, or the mind of these guardians about who their family is, and kind of making this big macro family. So I'm always wary when Socrates is like, oh, let's just give that a new name. You'd agree that this name's okay. Okay, so we've got the profit-loving, and now the victory-loving and honor-loving. The absolutely right one, the right note, says Glaucon. But surely it is clear to everyone that the element we learn with is always wholly straining to know where the truth lies, and that of the three it cares least for money and reputation. Oh, okay. So this is, I guess, either truth-loving or knowledge-loving. We'll see what he calls it. By far the least. Wouldn't it be appropriate then for us to call it learning-loving and philosophic? Okay, so we're doing a little rebranding here. Rational element became learning-loving. Spirited element became victory-loving. And then appetitive element became profit-loving. Glaucon, of course. And doesn't it rule in some people's souls, while one of the others, whichever it happens to be, rules in other people's? Glaucon, yes. And isn't that why we say there are three primary types of people: philosophic, victory-loving, and profit-loving? Glaucon, absolutely. Where's love-loving here? Socrates, and also three kinds of pleasure, one assigned to each of them. Glaucon, exactly. You realize then that if you chose to ask each of these three types of people in turn to tell you which of their lives is most pleasant, each would give the highest praise to his own. Okay, so you've got like a philosophic man, a victory-loving man, and a profit-loving man, and you're like, who among you is the happiest? And they all three raise their hands. Won't the moneymaker say that compared to that of making a profit, the pleasures of being honored or of learning are worthless, unless there is something in them that makes money? Yeah. I had an uncle like that. He was very skeptical of everything, but he was just always trying to save a buck. Like, he would tell us at Christmas, he's like reading U.S. News and World Report, but he didn't care about the best college, he cared about the best deal. So he's like, oh, have you considered the Rhode Island School of Oceanography? Their tuition is amazing. You can get a bachelor's cheaper than anywhere else in the country. And I'm sure it's a great school, but that is all he cared about, was how much money you were going to spend on things. Okay. Glaucon, true. What about the honor lover? Doesn't he think the pleasure of making money is vulgar, while the pleasure of learning, except to the extent that learning brings honor, is smoke and nonsense? I love that little phrase. Okay, so yeah, honor lover doesn't care about learning. Glaucon, he does. Socrates, as for the philosopher, what do you suppose he thinks of the other pleasures in comparison to that of knowing where the truth lies, and always enjoying some variety of it while he is learning? Won't he think they are far behind? And won't he call them really necessary, since he would have no need for them if they were not necessary for life? Glaucon, he will. We can be sure of that. Okay, yeah, this is I don't know. I'm just kind of going through these personality types in my head. I got some friends who are really into being respected, or I don't know. They're like, oh, what? You need to go here and do this so you get more respect. And because I was in grad school for a while, and I was mainly there to learn. I didn't really care about getting credentialed for anything. And some of my friends were just like, dude, you gotta get the credential. You gotta get the credential. You gotta get the credential. No, I just like learning things, and this credential for what I want to do seems like a waste of time. No, you gotta get it. You gotta get it. And they weren't really interested in me learning things, and I wasn't really interested in the honor part, which is why I'm talking to you here on YouTube. Okay, and then the philosopher, yeah, this is someone who's just driven by knowledge. I've definitely known these people too. I'd probably put myself in this category, um, and they just all they care about is the truth and like figuring out what's actually going on. They don't care about money. They don't care about pleasure. They're just like, hold on, like what's going on here? I have to know. This is the person who just has to know the answer, even if it costs them everything else. And so, like people, one of my friends who's a scientist is like this. Like he's always been like that. Even since he was a kid, he was just like had like really curious about religion because he's like, how do these guys know things that other people don't? Like, how does this priest know anything? Like, what does he know? How does he know it? How does he know it? How does he know it? And now he studies chemistry. But yeah, I think this is powerful to me as a psychological paradigm for kind of these three things. I think there've got to be more there. Like, there's not a whole lot about relationships, like people wanting love in their life. It's just like kind of externally directed toward these objects, whether it's money or honor or learning. So it does feel incomplete, but for having these three profiles, I can definitely think of people that fit each one. Okay, Glaucon, he will. We can be sure of that. Socrates. Since the pleasures of each kind and the lives themselves dispute with one another, not about which life is finer or more shameful, or better or worse, but about which is more pleasant and less painful, how are we to know which of them is speaking the absolute truth? Yeah, they're all raising their hand. How do we know who's right here? Glaucon, I have no idea how to answer that. Consider the matter this way. How should we judge things if we want to judge them well? Isn't it by experience, knowledge, and argument? Or could someone have better criteria than these? No, of course not. Okay, experience, knowledge, argument. Let's see where these lead. Consider then, of the three types of men, which has most experience of the pleasures we mentioned. Do you think the prophet lover learns what the truth itself is like, or has more experience of the pleasure of knowing than the philosopher does of making a profit? I'm thinking the philosopher's going to come out on top here because he knows about what profit loving is and what victory loving is, and those other guys don't know the truth. Glaucon, there's a great difference between them. You see, the latter has to have tasted the other kinds of pleasure beginning from childhood, but it is not necessary for the profit lover to taste or experience how sweet is the pleasure of learning the nature of the things that are. Yeah, that's the sweet pleasure. What is that? Didn't Richard Feynman have a book called that? I think it's called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. And even if he were eager to, he could not easily do so. Socrates, so the philosopher is far superior to the prophet lover in his experience of both kinds of pleasures. Wait, why is he... I'm not sure why the philosopher... The latter, so who's... is the latter the philosopher? Okay, so to become a true philosopher, you remember, we had this like long education where you need to have kind of a normal education when you're young and then go into politics for a while. And so I think he's had a taste of profit loving, I guess. So the true philosopher's like lived a full life and, been around the block. He's a man of the world. And so he knows what he's missing out on in terms of the profit loving. The profit lover does not know what he's missing out on the learning side. Okay, so Glaucon, very far superior. What about compared to the honor lover? Is he more inexperienced in the pleasure of being honored than the latter is in the pleasure of knowing? Glaucon, no. Honor comes to all of them, provided they accomplish their several aims. For the rich man, too, is honored by many people, as well as are the courageous and the wise ones. So, all have experience what the pleasure of being honored is like. But the pleasure pertaining to the sight of what is cannot be tasted by anyone except the philosopher. Okay, so the philosopher, it's like, I think if you just do normal things in your society, you will get a taste. Like, you're a professor at some university, professor of philosophy, you'll get recognized, and you'll get a little feel you'll get a taste of honor. Victor is. Do you get a taste of victory too? Maybe. I mean, I guess if you have, these guys are supposed to join the military for a little while, so maybe that too. I don't know. Socrates. So, as far as experience goes, then he is the finest judge among the three types of men. Glaucon, by far. Socrates, and he alone will have gained his experience with the help of knowledge. Of course. Moreover, the tool that should be used to judge is not the tool of the profit lover or the honor lover, but of the philosopher. What one is that? Surely we said that judgment should be made by means of arguments. Did we not? Yes. And arguments are, above all, his tool. Absolutely. If the things being judged were best judged by means of wealth and profit, the praise and criticism of the profit lover would necessarily be closest to the truth. Okay, so we're figuring out kind of the different yardsticks that these guys use, and we're saying argument is the best one, and that also happens to be the philosopher's best tool for measuring things. And if it were, if profit, if like the amount of money you could make from something was the metric, then we'd be agreeing with the money lover, is what he's saying. Glaucon, it would indeed. Socrates, and if by means of honor, victory, and courage, wouldn't it be those of the honor lover and victory lover? Clearly. But since it is by means of experience, knowledge, and argument, Glaucon, the praise of the philosopher and argument lover must be closest to the truth. Sure, why not? Socrates, so, of the three pleasures, then, the most pleasant would be that of the part of the soul with which we learn, and the one of us in whom it rules has the most pleasant life. Okay, so it's basically argument gets you to the truth. The philosopher knows how to argue. The philosopher is getting closest to the truth and will have the most happy life. Glaucon, how could it be otherwise? The knowledgeable person at least praises with authority when he praises his own life. Socrates, what life and pleasure does the judge say are in second place? Glaucon, clearly, those of the warrior and honor lover, since they are closer to his own than those of the moneymaker. So maybe we're kind of going down that ladder again, so starting with the aristocracy, and then the honor lover is kind of the timocracy, and then the moneymaker's the oligarchy. Socrates, and those of the profit lover come last, apparently. Glaucon, of course. Socrates, well then, that makes two in a row. And twice the just person has defeated the unjust one. Okay, we've got the two demonstrations now. We've got the tyrannical soul is secretly miserable, even though, he gets to kill as many people in the streets as he wants to. And then we have this argument that the philosopher is the one tied to the rational element, and he uses arguments. So he's had a taste of these different types of pleasures, and he knows the best one. And then also, since he uses argument, he gets closest to the truth, so we should trust his truth more than these other guys who are raising their hand saying that they're really happy. Okay. So the philosopher knows what he's missing out on, and the other guys don't. It's what it boils down to. Now comes the third, which is dedicated in Olympic fashion to our Savior, Olympian Zeus. Observe then that the other pleasures, apart from that of the knowledgeable person, are neither entirely true nor pure. On the contrary, they are like some sort of illusionist painting, as I think I've heard some wise person say. Didn't he talk about illusionist paintings before? Wasn't that like in book 3? I know that he did, because I remember using the phrase trompe-l'oeil, which means like an illusionist painting from like the late 19th century. But I don't remember what that was in reference to. It may have been the ideal city, but I think it would be funny if he were referring to himself when he's like, I think I've heard a very wise person say this. Like, wait a minute, wasn't that you, Socrates? Shh. Yet, if that were true, it would be the greatest and most decisive of the overthrows. Okay, so yeah, all right. So he's now going to have a third argument, which is that loving money and loving honor are not pure pleasures. whatever that means. Glaucon, by far the greatest. But what exactly do you mean? Socrates, I will find out if you answer the questions while I ask them. Glaucon, start asking then. Tell me then, don't we say that pain is the opposite of pleasure? Yes, we do. Isn't there also a state of feeling, neither enjoyment nor pain? What is neither enjoyment nor pain? Boredom? There is. Isn't it in the middle, between these two, a sort of quiet state of the soul where they are concerned? Or wouldn't you describe it that way? I would. So then, do you recall the sorts of things ill people say when they are ill? Which ones? Besides, I feel like crap. That nothing's more pleasant than being healthy. Yeah, they do say that. They've been saying that for a long time. But they had not realized it was most pleasant until they fell ill. This is what I love these old books for. It's like, people have been complaining about the same things for thousands of years. And, I don't know. It's like we think we're special and our experiences are the ones that matter, but people have been doing this forever. Like, we're not special at all. Okay, Glaucon, I do remember that. Socrates, don't you also hear people who are in great pain saying that nothing is more pleasant than the cessation of one's suffering? I do. And there are many similar circumstances, I presume, in which you see people in pain praising not enjoyment, but freedom from pain, and respite from that sort of thing, as most pleasant. Yeah, get me out of this hospital. Glaucon, yes. For at such times, the respite presumably becomes pleasant enough to content them. Socrates, and when someone ceases to enjoy something, this respite from pleasure will be painful. Presumably. So, the quiet state we just now described as being in between the two will sometimes be both pain and pleasure. Ah, okay. So if you're just feeling nothing, sometimes you're like, oh man, this is so much better than having this thorn in my side, so I consider this to be pleasure. And then somebody who just has pleasure all the time is just like, oh, wait, hold on. Bring me back my bottle of whiskey. I'm in pain. Glaucon, apparently. Socrates, and is it possible for what is neither to become both? So what is neither? Let's see. So can something that's neither pain nor pleasure become both pain and pleasure? Not in my view. Furthermore, when what is pleasant and what is painful arise in the soul, they are both a sort of motion, aren't they? Uh-oh. I hate these motion arguments. He's like, can something be still and in motion at the same time? What about a spinning top? Glaucon, yes. And then we see, just now, that what is neither painful nor pleasant is a respite, and in the middle between the two. Okay, where are you going with this, Socrates? Yes, we did. How can it be right, then, to think that the absence of pain is pleasant, or the absence of enjoyment painful? There's no way it can be. Okay, it's like, yeah, this can't really be... At first we said it was neither pain. We said the quiet state of the soul when you're not feeling anything is neither. And then you just said it was both. Because like when you just come out of either pain or come out of pleasure, you're like, man, this is different. This must be the other thing. And then he's saying, no, you can't have it both ways. It can't go from neither to both. Socrates, so it is not right. But when the quiet state is next to what is painful, it appears pleasant. And when it is next to what is pleasant, it appears painful. And there is nothing sound in these illusions as far as the truth about pleasure is concerned. On the contrary, they are a sort of sorcery. Okay, so I guess he's saying that this pain and pleasure are an illusion because you think this quiet state is something that it's not. So I think he's saying like pain and pleasure aren't real, or at least they're not absolute, or they're subjective. Just because we're like, oh man, what a relief! I feel so good not to be in that boiling hot sauna. And he's saying, no, this isn't pleasure you're feeling. This should be nothing. The pleasure you're feeling is an illusion, I think he's going to argue that that's why these pleasures aren't real, but maybe this argument does not apply to like the knowledge pleasure. Okay. Glaucon. That's what the argument suggests at any rate. Socrates. Well then, take a look at pleasures that do not derive from pains, so that you won't be likely to think that, in their case, it is the nature of pleasure to be just the cessation of pain, or of pain to be just the cessation of pleasure. Where am I to look? What pleasures do you mean? Socrates. There are lots of others, but you might especially want to think about the pleasures of smell. Yeah, who doesn't want to think about smells? You see, without being preceded by pain, they suddenly become incredibly intense. And when they cease, they leave no pain behind. Okay, yeah, you're not like, oh man, I've just been smelling roses all this time. Who took away my roses? I'm in pain. That's absolutely true. So, let's not be persuaded that pure pleasure is relief from pain, or pure pain relief from pleasure. No, let's not. That is kind of an interesting argument. Like, let's just talk about smell. Like, you smell something terrible, and then it goes away. You're not like, oh man, this is pleasure. It's like, no, that's just absence of smelling poop. Glaucon. Yeah, no, let's not. Socrates. However, of all the things called pleasures that reach the soul through the body, pretty much the greatest number, and the most intense ones too, are of that kind. They are some sort of relief from pains. Okay, so all of the things that reach the soul through the body. Okay, so all the bodily pleasures, or at least most of the pleasures, are reliefs from pains. Yes, they are. And aren't those pleasures and pains of anticipation, which arise from the expectation of future pains or pleasures, of the same kind? Glaucon, they are. Do you know what they are like and what they most resemble? Okay, so I guess it's a lot of the pleasure you're getting. It's like you take a bite of your pastry, and you're like, oh man, the rest of this pastry is going to be so good. So it's like that expectation gives you pleasure as much as anything. Glaucon, what? Do you think there is such a thing in the natural world as an up, a down, and a middle? I don't know. I do. Socrates, don't you imagine then that if someone were brought from down below to the middle, he would think anything other than that he was moving upward? Okay. And if he stood at the middle and saw where he had come from, could he possibly think that he was anywhere other than the upper region, since he hadn't seen the one that is truly up above? Okay, so you're brought from down below, so you're like up, middle, down. You're brought up to the middle. He's like, oh, I'm going up. But now he's just at the middle. Could he possibly think he was anywhere than the upper region? So he's like, yeah, I'm here at the top, but there's still something up here. Okay. That's interesting. I think of this often in terms of like emotional intelligence. If somebody's like, I don't know. I think people have very different levels of emotional intelligence, but most people think that they understand why everybody else is doing what they're doing, but like I think a lot of people are doing things for reasons that they don't actually fully understand. So they're like, oh, I'm here at the top, but like they might be in the middle, and all the people that are more intelligent, they're like, oh, those guys are, I don't know what they're doing. They're not above me though. They're just doing these weird things that I don't get. So I've been meaning to flesh that idea out in an essay at some point. So there's a little sneak peek. I'll probably be citing Socrates in that one. All right, we'll keep moving. Glaucon, by Zeus, I do not see how he could think anything else. Socrates, but if he were brought back again, wouldn't he think he was being brought down? And wouldn't he be thinking the truth? Okay, goes from the bottom up to the middle, drag back down. It's like, I'm going down the elevator, back in the parking garage. Glaucon, of course. And wouldn't all this happen to him, because he is inexperienced in what is truly and really up, middle, and down? Clearly, would it surprise you then, if those who are inexperienced in the truth have unsound beliefs about lots of other things as well, that they are so disposed toward pleasure, pain, and the middle state that, whenever they descend to the painful, they think the truth and really are in pain, but that, when they ascend from the painful to the middle state, they firmly think they have reached fulfillment and pleasure. Like people who compare black to gray without having experienced white, Don't they compare pain to painlessness while being inexperienced in pleasure and so get deceived? They're like, oh man, this is so much better. We're finally here at the nice hotel, but like there's like a much, much nicer hotel down the block that you don't know about, where like the super wealthy hang out. Like, yeah, I've made it. Glaucon, no, by Zeus, it would not surprise me. In fact, I would be very surprised if it were not like that. Yeah, or it's like, I don't know, isn't there like an American Express black card? So it's like, they got all these credit cards, they got the hierarchy of credit cards, and there's like the ones everybody knows about. You're like the gold card, and you're like, oh, I got the platinum card, I've made it. But then there's like a secret black card, and like, it's like invitation only. And so, you don't even know the world of benefits that you're missing out on with the black card, but you just think, you think you know everything, but you know, you're kind of a sucker. Okay. Socrates, think of it this way then. Aren't hunger, thirst, and the like some sort of emptiness related to the state of the body? Glaucon, they are. And isn't foolishness and lack of knowledge, in turn, some sort of emptiness related to the state of the soul? Okay. Lack of knowledge. Your soul's empty, I guess. It certainly is. Aren't people filled when they take in nourishment or gain understanding? Of course. Does the truer filling belong to what is less or to what is more? The truer filling. Okay, I'll just keep going with this. Clearly, belongs to what is more. Which of the two types, then, partakes more of pure being? The sorts belonging to bread, drink, relishes, and nourishment in general, or the kind belonging to true belief, knowledge, and understanding, and in sum to all of virtue? Judge it this way. What belongs to what is always the same, immortal, and true? This is a leading question. Is itself of that sort, and comes to be in something of that sort? It is more, don't you think, than what belongs to what is never the same and mortal, is itself of that kind, and comes to be in something of that kind? Glaucon, far more. What belongs to what is always the same. Oh, what belongs to what is always the same is far superior. So this is again kind of drawing a distinction between the eternal and the temporary, saying this knowledge is eternal, therefore it's superior to this temporary stuff. Of course, like if it's false knowledge, then it's like, oh, here's this great eternal false knowledge that I have. I'll just be eternally blind to what's actually going on. But I guess he's saying argument always leads you to the truth, so don't worry about that. Socrates, and I guess this is, I don't know, maybe this is sort of an argument against the like Epicureans who, you know, they like to party, but mainly just like, yeah, everything we know about is what you see. If you can't see it, you don't really know about it. Enjoy it while it lasts. Okay. Socrates, and does the being of what is always the same, partake any more of being than of knowledge? Okay, I don't know what he's talking about here. I'm going to read that again. Does the being of what is always the same, I kind of imagine hyphens in there, partake any more of being than of knowledge? I don't know what that means. Not at all. Okay, I'm going to look at the note here, because this is confusing. This is starting to sound like Heidegger or something. No. Okay. So the being what is always the same. So the eternal thing, is it more being or more knowledge? I guess. It's just that's just like a meaningless question to me. Not at all, he says. I guess he's saying it participates equally in being and knowledge. Oh, this is dumb. What about of truth? Not of it either. And if less of truth, less of being too. What? About of truth. Okay, does it partake any more of being than of truth? So it does not partake any more of being than of knowledge or than of truth. And so if it's partaking, I guess, equally of being, truth, and knowledge. if it's participating in the eternal. And if less of truth, less of being too. So any less that it participates in truth, it equally participates less in being. Glaucon, necessarily. Isn't it generally true that the types concerned with the care of the body partake less in truth, in being, than do those concerned with the care of the soul? Okay, so the types, might be the types of people. So if you're concerned with the care of the body, you're kind of less involved with truth and less involved with the eternal. So we've had being contrasted with like coming to be and decaying. So I think being means sort of eternal being. And then people who are concerned with the care of the soul, they participate more in truth, participate more in being. Somehow. Glaucon, yes, much less. Don't you think the same holds of the body in comparison to the soul? So I guess the body itself participates less in truth and being than the soul. Okay. Glaucon, I do. And I can kind of see why these medieval scholasticists love Plato. Because he's like, oh look, he said the soul is eternal. Like, clearly everybody has one. Alright, Socrates. Then isn't it what is filled with things that are more, and is itself more really filled than what is filled with things that are less, and is itself less? Okay, this chapter is getting harder than I thought it would be. It reminds me of the end of book 5 and the end of book 6 in terms of just the abstraction level. Okay, so I'm gonna read that again and see if I can make sense of it. Isn't what is filled with things that are more, and is itself more really filled than what is filled with things that are less, and is itself less? Okay, so if you're filled with moreness, then you are more than if you're filled with things that are less. So it's like we got a bowl, and we can either fill it up with, I don't know, gold, and that's more than Cocoa Puffs. So if you're filled with gold, then you're more than something that's filled with Cocoa Puffs. Assuming gold is a thing that is more than a Cocoa Puff. Glaucon, of course. So then, if being filled with what is appropriate to our nature is pleasant, what is more filled with things that are more is more really and truly cause to enjoy a more true pleasure. Whereas, what partakes of things that are less is less truly and surely filled and partakes of a less trustworthy and less true pleasure. Okay, being filled with what is appropriate to our nature is pleasant. What is more filled with things that are more is more really. Okay, so I think it's saying just like with the bowl. So the bowl is your soul, and if you fill it with the more thing, which I guess is true knowledge, then that's going to make everything be more and be a more true pleasure. And if you fill it with Cocoa Puffs or bodily pleasures, then that's less, and that makes your soul less. Whew. Glaucon, that's absolutely inevitable. Socrates, so, those who lack experience of knowledge or virtue, but are always occupied with feasts and the like, are brought down apparently, and then back up to the middle state, and wander in this way throughout their lives, never reaching beyond this to what is truly higher up, never looking up at it or brought up to it, never filled with what really is, never tasting any stable or pure pleasure. On the contrary, they are always looking downward like cattle, and, with their heads bent over the earth or the dinner table, they feed, fatten, and fornicate. And, in order to do better than the others in these things, they kick and butt with iron horns and hooves, killing each other, because their desires are insatiable. For they aren't using things that are to fill the part of themselves that is a thing that is, in a leak-proof vessel. Glaucon, you have described the life of the many, Socrates, just like an oracle. Okay, I'm going to look at these notes. That was a very beautiful passage. Good work, Socrates. It reminded me of looking downward like cattle, their heads bent over the earth or the dinner table. You got the comparison to animals, but the thing this really reminds me of is that line he had about the man who goes to Hades having never woken up. That the one that gave me the chills. It's in the last video or book 8. But yeah, he's so good at just like describing. He's almost better at describing the non-philosopher than the philosopher. Okay, something Stegnon contrasting the Gorgias with the leaking jar in which the appetites are located. Okay, so these poor people are filling themselves up with these temporary pleasures, and go to the grave having never felt a true pleasure of the mind. Socrates, so, isn't it necessary then for these people to live with pleasures that are mixed with pains, mere phantoms and illusionist paintings of true pleasures? And aren't they so colored by their juxtaposition with one another that they appear intense, beget mad passions for themselves and the foolish, and are fought over? As C.D.C tells us, the phantom of Helen was fought over at Troy through ignorance of the truth. Something like that must be what happens. Mustn't similar things happen to someone who succeeds in satisfying the spirited element? Must his love of honor be so colored by envy, his love of victory by violence, and his spiritedness by peevishness, that he pursues the satisfactions of honor, victory, and spiritedness without rational calculation or understanding? Ah, okay, so he's kind of a slave to this element too, and can't even enjoy a good old victory without violence coloring it. Okay, so again, we're going to have the triumph of the rational element. The same sorts of things must happen with regard to that element, too. Can't we confidently assert, then, that even where the desires of the profit-loving and honor-loving parts are concerned, those that follow knowledge and argument, and pursue with the help of the pleasures that wisdom prescribes, will attain, to the degree that they can attain true pleasure at all, the truest pleasures, because they follow truth in those that are most their own, if indeed what is the best for each thing is also what is most its own. Okay. Those that follow knowledge and art. Okay, so he's saying even when you're you're a philosophic man, but you like honor and profit too. You ain't gonna lie. Remember we had Socrates getting angry at that one point. He's like, oh, you started saying how bad philosophers were, and that like drove me to anger. And he's saying that happens in the philosopher. But they pursue with their help the pleasures that wisdom prescribes. Those that follow knowledge and argument. Okay, but they kind of use reason to keep those in control, and in order to get the truest pleasure. Okay, but that, of course, is what is most its own. Whew. All right, keep going. Socrates. So, when the entire soul follows the philosophic element and does not engage in faction, the result is that each element does its own work and is just. And in particular, each enjoys its own pleasures, the best pleasures, and to the degree possible, the truest. Okay, so it's not like the philosophic man just gets rid of these other things. They each are pursuing their pleasures, but controlled by reason. And that gives them the best pleasure as a result. Glaucon. Absolutely. Socrates. So, when one of the other parts gains mastery, the result is that it cannot discover its own pleasure and compels the other part to pursue an alien and not a true pleasure. So if the appetites take hold, or the victory-loving component takes hold, then, yeah, it can't discover its own pleasure properly. Like, your appetites can't lead you to truth, but your philosophy can lead you to appetites. Glaucon, yes. And wouldn't what is most distant from philosophy and reason be most likely to produce that result? By far. And isn't what is most distant from reason the very thing that is most distant from law and order? Clearly. And wasn't it made evident that the passionate and tyrannical appetites are most distant? Glaucon, by far the most. and the kingly and orderly ones least distant. Yes. Then the tyrant, I suppose, will be most distant from a true pleasure that is his own, while the king will be least distant. Okay, so bringing this argument back to the tyrant and king with this the pleasure elevator. Glaucon, it is inevitable. And so, the tyrant will live most unpleasantly, and the king most pleasantly. Okay, because the tyrant is far from a true pleasure, and the king is closest to the true pleasure, because the true pleasure is, I guess, illuminated by philosophy. Glaucon, it is absolutely inevitable. Do you know, then, how much more unpleasant the tyrant's life is than the king's? This would be an interesting number. Glaucon, not unless you tell me. Socrates, there are, it seems, 3 pleasures, 1 genuine and 2 illegitimate. The tyrant is at the extreme end of the illegitimate ones, since he flees both law and reason, and lives with a bodyguard of slavish pleasures. But it is not at all easy to say just how inferior he is, except perhaps as follows. How? The tyrant is somehow at a third remove from the oligarch, since the democrat was in the middle between them. Okay, so we got, remember, tyrant, democrat, oligarch. Yes. Socrates, won't he also live with a phantom of pleasure, then, that, as regards truth, is it a third remove from that other, if what we said before is true? He will. So I think he's saying that, okay, so we had the tyrant is next to the democrat is next to the oligarch, so that's like a third remove. And then the pleasure of the body is next to the victory-loving element, is next to the philosophy element. So that's the third remove. Okay, but the oligarch, in turn, is at a third remove from the king if we assume king and aristocrat to be the same. Okay, so then the oligarch is at a remove from the timocrat, is that a remove from the king. So I think he means, when I think he's saying third remove, I think he means like it's 2 away. Glaucon, yes, third. So a tyrant is removed from true pleasure by a numerical value of 3 times 3. What? Apparently, I don't know where he's getting this. I don't know why he's multiplying the pleasure times the form of government or something. Okay, I'll look at the footnote here, because the timocrat is in between them. Okay, so then there's a long note in a minute here. Get ready for that. We're going to be reading the long note. That's what we do here on the channel. We leave no stone unturned. That's why you're already like 28 hours into the Republic here with me. See where it goes. Okay, Glaucon, apparently. So on the basis of the size of this numerical value, it seems the phantom of the tyrant's pleasure is a plane figure. Glaucon, exactly. On the basis of its square and cube, in that case, it becomes clear how far removed it is. Okay, so we're multiplying things for some reason, and a square is like length times height. Clear to someone skilled in calculation, anyway. Socrates. Turning it the other way around, then, if someone wants to say how far the king is removed from the tyrant in terms of true pleasure, he will find, if he completes the calculation, that he lives 729 times more pleasantly, while the tyrant lives the same number of times more painfully. 729. What is happening? Is that... Alright, I'm going to look at the note. So, 729... Is that... I forgot what. Is that 81 times 9? I think that's 81 times 9, right? And 81 is 9 times 9. So this is 9 cubed. Because I think he's talking about the cubes a second ago. So I'm going to look at the note here, and we're going to go through the math. But 729 is definitely 9 cubed, which would also be 3 raised to the 6th. Is that right? 3 to the 6th? Somebody can work it out. I don't know this stuff. Socrates' mathematics is difficult to follow. He seems to have something like this in mind. The tyrant's pleasure is a 2-dimensional image, a plane figure, alright, of the true 3-dimensional pleasure of the philosopher. Okay, so the philosopher is like that's the philosopher's pleasure right here. Three-dimensional figure. Put on your 3D glasses. Okay, hence, if a 1-unit square represents the degree of closeness to true pleasure of an image 9 times removed from it. So you have a 1-unit square, and it's the degree of closeness to true pleasure of an image 9 times removed from it. So 9 units away, maybe. Then true pleasure should be represented by a 9-unit cube. Okay, so we're 9 units away because we had the 3 times 3, which was like 3 times more pleasure, and then 3 times the unit of government. That gave us 9. And so now we're 9 away in 1 dimension. So the true pleasure should be represented by a 9-unit cube. Okay, so now it's like true pleasure is 9 times better than the tyrant's pleasure in 3 dimensions. It follows that the king lives 729 times more pleasantly than the tyrant. However, in order to reach the significant number, 729, there are 729 days and nights in a year of 364 24-hour days and 729 months in the great year recognized by the Pythagorean philosopher Philolaus. Socrates has had to make 2 rather fast moves. that dirty dog. First, he illegitimately capitalizes on the Greek manner of counting series in order to count the oligarch twice, once as the last term in the first series, tyrant, democrat, oligarch. Okay, so it's like, he says, oh, that's 3 times removed when it's really twice removed. And again as the first term in his second series, oligarch, timocrat, king. Second, he multiplies the number of times the tyrant is removed from the oligarch by the number of times the oligarch is removed from the king, when he should have added them. Yeah, come on now. In fact, the tyrant is only 5 times removed from the king, and so lives only 125 times less pleasantly. Nice work, C.D.C. Reeve. Correcting the record for us. We just got to throw this whole book out. Plato can't even add. Okay, whatever. This is a little painful. Keep plowing. Glaucon. That's an extraordinary calculation of the difference between the 2 men, the just one and the unjust one, in terms of their pleasure and pain. Socrates. And yet it is a number that is both true and appropriate to human lives, if indeed days, nights, months, and years are appropriate to them. So I think that's what he's talking about with the months and 24-hour days and stuff. And of course they are appropriate. If the victory of the good and just person over the bad and unjust one in terms of pleasure is as great as that, won't his victory in terms of its grace, beauty, and virtue be extraordinarily greater? Okay, yeah, because we've just been measuring in terms of pleasure now, and he says, well, look at all these other things. Grace and beauty. Tyrants don't have those. Extraordinarily greater indeed by Zeus. All right, then. Since we have reached this point in the argument, let's return to the first things we mentioned that led us here. I think someone said that doing injustice profits a completely unjust person who is believed to be just. That was the Book 2 claim. Wasn't that the claim? Was it Book 2? Check the footnote. Come on, Kindle app. Let me click. This is kind of the worst app in some way. Okay, I can't even click the note. Oh, there's the note. Yeah, alright, somewhere. Whatever. Glaucon, yes it was. Socrates, let's discuss it with its proponent then, since we have now agreed on the respective effects of doing unjust and doing just things. How? Socrates, by fashioning an image of the soul in words, so that the one who said that will know what he was saying. Wasn't Glaucon the one saying that? What sort of image? One of those creatures that ancient legends say used to exist. The chimera, Scylla, Kerberos, and a number of other cases where many different kinds are said to have grown together into one. Yes, they do describe such things. Well then, fashion a single species of complex, many-headed beast with a ring of tame and savage animal heads that can grow and change at will. I love how he just conjured up this mythical beast for this part of the argument. Glaucon, that's a task for a clever fashioner of images. Still, since language is easier to fashion than wax and the like, consider the fashioning done. There's language again. Now, fashion another single species of lion, and a single one of human being. But make the first much the greatest, and the second in size. Okay, got a big lion and a smaller human. That's easier. The fashioning is done. Now, join the three in one so they somehow grow together naturally. Okay, so we got a lion, a human, and then a many-headed beast or something. Why not? They are joined. Then fashion around the outside the image of one of them, that of the human being, so that to anyone who cannot see what is inside but only sees the outer shell, it will look like a single creature, a human being. Okay, so I see where this is going. Do you see where this is going? So we got these three animals. There's the human, the lion, the many-headed beast. They're kind of conjoined, and then there's a human around them. So I think it's the three parts of the soul. The surrounding shell has been fashioned. When someone claims then that it profits this human being to do injustice, but that doing what is just brings no advantage, let's tell him that he is saying nothing other than it profits him to feed well and strengthen the multifarious beast, as well as the lion and everything that pertains to the lion, to starve and weaken the human being so that he is dragged along wherever either of the other two leads, and not to accustom the two to one another or make them friends, but to leave them to bite and fight and devour one another. This is so good. And he's talked about using images before. He said that was a theme in the book 6, maybe. And he said it's sort of a lesser form of reasoning than pure argument. So remember, pure argument is the world outside of the cave. But here he gets specific. He says there's a role for this. He says when someone claims, then let's tell him. So I guess what the philosopher does is uses pure argument and reason to arrive at the truth. Like, he uses this dialectic that he's had in the rest of Book 9. And then, in order to persuade someone else, you have to go back down into the cave. And the people in the cave don't understand pure argument and reason. So to persuade them, you need images. I think that's what he's saying. So it's the role of the philosopher, first to discover the truth, and then second to make an image, or like a parable perhaps, so that it's like fit for mass consumption. Does that make sense? And I think that's kind of in some ways that's just like the academic ideal. Like, oh, you got to research and you got to teach. So it's like the research, you do the stuff that basically nobody understands. And then you go to the classroom and you're like, okay, let me make some analogies so that you can kind of understand this, but really you need to study this a lot more if you're like going to really understand it. But I'm going to be able to persuade you just with the image and with my authority here. So this is the bit that's for public consumption. Okay. And yeah, the tyrant is putting the beast in charge, and the beast is fighting the poor lion and human to death. Glaucon, yes, that's exactly what someone who praises doing injustice is saying. Socrates, on the other hand, wouldn't someone who claims that what is just is profitable be saying we should do and say what will give the inner human being the greatest mastery over the human being, to get him to take care of the many-headed beast like a farmer, feeding and domesticating the gentle heads and preventing the savage ones from growing, to make the lion's nature his ally, so that's the spiritedness, and to care for all in common, bringing them up in such a way that they will be friends with each other and with himself. Okay, so this really clarifies everything he's been saying. It's like, you got to put the human in charge. He can feed the beast, but he's got to keep the beast under control. Yes, that's exactly what someone who praises justice is saying. From every point of view, then, the one who praises what is just speaks truly, while the one who praises what is unjust speaks falsely. I think it's interesting he talks about speaking truly and speaking falsely rather than just looking at the kind of the idea on its own merits. He's not just saying this is true, this is false. It's like, no, the speaker is true, the speaker is false. For whether we consider pleasure or good reputation or advantage, the one who praises the just tells the truth, while the one who condemns it has nothing sound to say and condemns with no knowledge of what he is condemning. Okay, yeah. So if you're condemning justice, like, you don't know what it is you're saying. You don't realize that you're praising letting this multifarious beast rule within you, which is never going to make you happy. Just feeding your appetites all the time. None at all, in my opinion. Socrates, then let's persuade him gently. After all, he's not getting it wrong intentionally. By questioning him as follows. Bless you. So he's talking to this guy. Talking maybe to older, like Glaucon from Book 2. But shouldn't we claim that this is also the basis of the conventional norms concerning what is fine and what is shameful? What is fine is what subordinates the beast-like elements in our nature to the human one, or better, perhaps, to the divine, whereas what is shameful is what enslaves the tame element to the savage. Will he agree, or what? So I think this is starting to mix aesthetics into it, which I'm not a big fan of, because you're never going to get an objective definition of that, but, back in the day, it made sense. So yeah, I think he's saying beautiful things are like orderly and reasoned, and you're keeping the beast under control. All right, Glaucon he will if he takes my advice. Socrates, is there anyone then, in light of this argument, who profits by acquiring gold unjustly, if the result is something like this? In taking the gold, he simultaneously enslaves the best element in himself to the most wicked. Okay, all right, this is a guy cheating on his taxes. If he got the gold by enslaving his son or daughter to savage and evil men, it would not profit him, no matter how much he got for doing it. So, if he ruthlessly enslaves the most divine element in himself, so it makes him a worse person, to the most godless and polluted, how could he fail to be wretched when he accepts golden gifts in return for a far more terrible destruction than that of Eriphyle, who took the necklace in return for her husband's soul? Ooh, yeah, so what he's saying here is if you're cheating on your taxes, it corrupts your soul, and so you'll never be happy. Okay. A much more terrible one. I will answer for him. And don't you think intemperance has long been condemned for reasons of this sort, that it is because of vices like it that terrible creature, the great and multiform beast, is given more freedom than it should be? Glaucon, clearly. Okay, so what he's saying here, now this is finally his refutation of Thrasymachus. So you remember Thrasymachus said, and this is kind of before Glaucon elaborated on it, saying like, oh, you have this unjust guy who people think is just. Thrasymachus said, it's just your justice is the advantage of the stronger. The reason you don't cheat on your taxes is because you're taking money, like you're ripping off the people who run the place with like the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are they're the stronger ones, and so that's why it's seen as unjust, is that you're ripping off the voters, and at least in a democracy. And Socrates is just saying no. The reason that this has always been banned, it's not because you're ripping off the people who vote or the people in charge. It's because it corrupts your soul and gives over power to the terrible multiform creature inside you. Glaucon, clearly. Socrates, and aren't stubbornness and peevishness condemned because they inharmoniously increase and stretch the lion-like and snake-like element? Which one is snake-like? Oh, come on, let me hit You see the note. The snake-like element hasn't been previously mentioned. Although it may be included in all that pertains to the lion. Yeah, he needed an editor. It symbolizes some of the meaner components of the spirited part, such as peevishness, which would be unnatural to attribute to the noble lion. Snakes were thought to guard shrines and other sacred places. Including a snake-like element in the part of the soul dominant in guardians is, therefore, somewhat natural. That's the kind of footnote I'm here for. That's why you need to buy the full copy, which you should all do, so they don't think I'm just here hurting their sales. Okay, Glaucon, certainly. Socrates, and aren't luxury and softness condemned for slackening and loosening the same part, because that produces cowardice in it? Glaucon, of course. And aren't flattery and illiberality condemned, because they subject the same spirited element to the mob-like beast, allow it to be showered with abuse for the sake of money and the latter's insatiability, and habituate it from youth to be an ape instead of a lion? Okay, so he's explaining why all these things that are condemned by society are condemned, resorting to an argument about what it does to the individual soul rather than the harm to society. So that's interesting how it's that's how we come full circle here. It's like it's all about what's in you. It's not about the external world. We kind of made this whole fake city just to get back to the corruption of your own soul. Glaucon, yes indeed. Why do you think someone is reproached for menial work or handicraft? Or shall we say that it is for no other reason than because the best element is naturally weak in him, so that it cannot rule the beasts within him, but can only serve them and learn what flatters them? Okay, so I think what he's doing here is like, he's kind of going through all the societal norms and then proving that they are somehow follow from his theory of the soul. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like the same arguments where they're like, I don't know, economists really like looking at English common law, and they're like, oh, look, English common law, it's really, like, gives the efficient outcome. Like, you want to have squatters' rights because maybe you have this unknown property that has unknown utility, and then the person is getting utility out of it, and it's maximizing efficiency somehow. And you're just like, okay, maybe, I guess. Like, that's a cool explanation. I don't really know what else to do with it. But I think that's sort of what he's doing here. He's like, oh, well, society says this, and that's because that's a great nugget of wisdom because it's protecting your soul. Yeah, same with, like, I don't know, the Bible, or like the rules in the Old Testament, or like Leviticus has all these rules. It's like, don't eat pork and don't eat shrimp. And then people are like, oh yeah, and there were all these like health benefits of following that from back in the day, but maybe they sort of knew it at the time, maybe they didn't. Just like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Glaucon, apparently. Socrates, in order to ensure then that someone like that is also ruled by something similar to what rules the best person, we say that he should be the slave of that best person who has the divine ruler within himself. Okay, yeah, you need a king inside. It is not to harm the slave that we say he should be ruled, as Thrasymachus supposed was true of all subjects, but because it is better for everyone to be ruled by a divine and wise ruler, just like that aristocracy, preferably one that is his own and that he has inside himself. Otherwise, one imposed on him from outside, so that we may all be as alike and as friendly as possible, because we are all captained by the same thing. Ah, okay. Preferably one that is his own, otherwise imposed on him from outside. So this is kind of interesting. This is bringing us back to the city, and saying that we want you to have this internal king. But if you don't, if you are ruled by a beast, then maybe we need to impose that king on you. And we're going to keep your appetites under control through political authority. Yeah, and because we need, in order to make us all alike and as friendly as possible, which is really how you make a city, is having people, like, alike and friendly, at least in ways that lead to trade and going to war together, etc. So yeah, and what's interesting to me, to tie it back to my esoteric interpretation, which I gave at the beginning of the book 6 video, is this is giving us another power. This is giving us kind of a powerful internal mythology. So you remember my interpretation then was that maybe his definition of justice was a myth, or was a noble lie, in order to keep society strong, make a strong society so that you could attack other societies. And the only one of the shortcomings of that was that myth wasn't all that powerful. That wouldn't persuade the average person. Like, you start talking to the average person about, like, oh yeah, there's the rational element and spirited element and appetites, and justice is keeping them separate. They'd just be like, what? So maybe the philosopher would be persuaded and say, yeah, okay, I understand what those 3 parts are. I want them separated, just like in the ideal city, and therefore I identify myself with my city or with my country. Like, you know, I've got an American flag written on my heart, the red, white, and blue. And he's filling in something. He's providing a missing piece now in that esoteric interpretation, which, you know, who knows what the truth is. But the missing piece there would be a mythology that would be appealing to the average person. Now I think he has it. I think with this image of the human being, the lion, and the multifarious beast, or multi-headed beast, I think that's someone everybody could relate to. And I think that would be sort of a compelling myth for people when you're saying, okay, you need to let reason rule you. You're like, why? It's like, well, because you have a lion inside you who loves victory, and you have a beast inside you who loves food, sex, and drink, and you gotta keep the beast. You can feed the beast, but you gotta keep the beast chained up. And I think they could relate to that, and so maybe that would be a missing piece of the puzzle in terms of providing everybody else with this mythology, in order to get everybody working together, in order to make the city work, trade work, war work, everything else, so that we can support our luxurious lifestyle. Okay, because the beast likes pastries. Glaucon, yes, that's right. This is clearly the aim of the law as well, which is the ally of everyone in the city. It is also our aim in ruling our children. We do not allow them to be free until we establish a constitution in them as in a city. That is to say, we take care of their best part with the similar one in ourselves and equip them with a guardian and a ruler similar to our own to take our place. Only then do we set them free. Sounds about right. That's how you raise a kid. Make sure they got their appetites under control. Glaucon, yes, that's clearly so. How then will we claim, Glaucon, and on the basis of what argument, that it profits someone to do injustice, or what is intemperate, or some shameful thing that will make him worse, even if it brings more money or power or of some other sort? Glaucon, there's no way we can. Or, how can we claim that it profits him to be undetected in his injustice and not pay the penalty? So this is the core of Glaucon's argument from Book 2. I mean, doesn't the one who remains undetected become even worse, while in the one who is discovered and punished, the bestial element is calmed and tamed, and the gentle one freed? Okay, so this is the argument that, like, punishment helps the person being punished. It's like you're correcting their soul. Doesn't his entire soul, when it returns to its best nature and acquires temperance and justice, along with wisdom, achieve a condition that is as more honorable than that of a body when it acquires strength and beauty, along with health, as a soul is more honorable than a body? Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, won't anyone with any sense, then, give everything he has to achieve it as long as he lives? First, won't he honor the studies that produce it, and not honor the others? Okay, so he's saying a soul governed by temperance and justice is even better than, like, a beautiful beach body. And everybody's going to strive after it. I don't know if that's true. I think a lot of people care more about their beach bod. Glaucon, clearly. Second, As regards the condition and nurture of his body, not only will he not give himself over to bestial and irrational pleasure and live turned in that direction, but he won't make health his aim, nor give precedence to the ways of becoming strong or healthy or beautiful, unless he is also going to become temperate as a result of them. On the contrary, it is clear that he will always be tuning the harmony of his body for the sake of the concord of his soul. Okay, it's just like Book 3, we talked about the musical education and physical education going together, improving the soul. Glaucon, he certainly will, if indeed he is going to be truly musical. Socrates, won't he also keep order and concord in his acquisition of money? He won't be dazzled, will he, by what the masses regard as blessed happiness, and, by increasing the size of his wealth without limit, acquire an unlimited number of evils? Not in my view. On the contrary, he will keep his eye fixed on the constitution within him, and guard against disturbing anything there, either with too much money or with too little. Captaining himself in that way, he will increase and spend his wealth as far as possible by reference to it. Okay, so yeah, saving some cash, not spending too much, just being a nice, reasonable guy. Glaucon, that's exactly what he will do. Where honors are concerned, too, he will keep his eye on the same thing. He will willingly share in and taste those he believes will make him better. But those that might overthrow the established condition of his soul he will avoid, both in private and in public. Glaucon, so, he won't be willing to take part in politics, then, if that is what he cares about. Yes, by the dog, in his own city he certainly will. But he may not be willing to do so in his fatherland unless some divine good luck chances to be his. Okay, so it's like he'll run for local office, but not for president. I understand. You mean in the city we have just been founding and describing, the one that exists in words, since I do not think it exists anywhere on earth. So the ideal city. But there may be, perhaps, a model, says Socrates, of it in the heavens, for anyone who wishes to look at it and to found himself on the basis of what he sees. Ah, here it is. Here it is. It makes no difference at all whether it exists anywhere or ever will. Woo! You see, he would take part in the politics of it alone, and of no other. Glaucon, that's probably right. Okay, isn't this interesting? This is like the Mario 2 ending. Remember Mario Brothers 2? You play this whole video game, you grind on it for hours and hours and hours, and you get to the end, and it's like, oh, actually, Mario, this is all in Mario's dream. And so it's like, nah, this whole world never existed. But, you're a better person now that you finished playing the game. All you had to do was play the game in your head. The city, the only reason the city exists is so you can model your soul on it. So that's fascinating. That's like, we've been kind of treating it this whole time as this real place. Like, yeah, we could found this, and it's practical for the Greeks could do it. You could have a philosopher, or become a king by persuasion. You could have a king become a philosopher. He really got into the details of how this could actually happen, and now he's giving up the ghost. He's like, yeah, actually, all that matters, I just wanted to convince you that it could happen and that it would be a just place, but really, the ideal city is you. This is what you should be doing in your own life. Forget actually trying to found one of these things. Doesn't matter if you do or don't, because historically speaking, you have a very slim chance of being able to bring about one of these things. So at an individual level, it's like, yeah, I don't live in an ideal city. I probably can't have any real effect on an ideal city. Maybe I should just turn inward. So I kind of see why this would be appealing to Christian philosophers, which has more to do with maintaining the state of your soul than trying to establish an ideal theocracy. Well, depending on the branch of Christianity you get into, or Christian philosophy you get into. But yeah, that's a kind of a beautiful ending to that line of argument. Is just we just spent so much time with all the details of the city, where these people are going to eat, how they're going to have sex, how they're going to have kids, and how this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And then it's just no, this is all just to convince you can do the same inside yourself. Just such a long road to take. But maybe, I think Socrates seems like this master of persuasion here. So maybe it is that long road that you need to take in order to really have all this stuff hit home. So, I don't know. Really fascinating. Really interested to see where Book 10 goes. So that's it for Book 9 here. So we started out the book with the description of the tyrannical soul and how ultimately he's unhappy because he's governed by his appetites. And then we entered some other arguments there. We said that he kind of made this mapping between rational element philosopher, spirited element victory lover, appetitive element money lover. And he says if you took those three people, put them in a room, said who's happiest, they'd all raise their hands. But really we have to listen to the philosopher. He gave a couple reasons for that. One was the philosopher knows what it's like to make money and have pleasure. He also knows what it's like to have honor. The other two guys don't know what it's like to be a philosopher, so really the philosopher's opinion is the only one we can trust. Second, he says the philosopher measures things with argument, whereas the other guys measure things with honor and money. And we've said that argument is the closest to truth. Like, money doesn't make the truth. So, therefore, we should trust the ability to measure of the philosopher. Like, the philosopher's yardstick is the one to be trusted, and he's the one who's seeking after truth, and he's judging his pleasure to be the best. So we need to trust that he's the happiest because he has the truest pleasure. Then we have this third line of argument about the pleasure elevator. And so first he starts talking about how people think the absence of pain is a kind of pleasure, and the absence of pleasure is a kind of pain. And he says that's all illusions. So pleasures or pains where that happens are really kind of these illusionist, relative, subjective pleasures and pains. And then he starts talking about this the pain elevator. So you're down in the parking garage, which is a place of pain, and then you take it up to the first floor, and you're like, oh my god, I'm feel so good. This is true pleasure. But you don't realize, if you put the right key into the keypad, then you can go all the way to the rooftop pool. So the philosophers are hanging out at the rooftop pool, and most other people don't even know it's there. They don't believe it's there. They're just no, I don't see a button for rooftop pool here in this elevator. I'm here outside. Look, I can see things outside here on the first floor. And so he's just saying these guys don't even know what they're missing. But it's the philosopher who sort of sees everything, and compares it to someone who's seen only blackness. When they say grayness for the first time, they're oh, this must be white. It's no, there's a true white out there that you guys are missing out on. And then finally we get toward this, or we get all this stuff about the what is and the being, and so I guess a fourth argument would be that the philosopher partakes in the eternal, of the being of what is, and partaking of knowledge and truth and all that. Pretty hard to follow. One of the more difficult passages in the entire book. I put that in the top 3 most difficult passages. The others being the end of Book 5 and the end of Book 6. And then finally we arrive at these... Oh yeah, then we have this weird mathematical exposition. He's well, how much happier would this person be? He's well, you got a square, and it's 3 by 3, and you multiply this, and it's 9, and then it's a cube of 9, and it's a 9 by 9 cube, and the cube is 729. And then the translator's no, it's only 125. It's just... This is just this is where I start to think it's just kind of parody, and I don't know. Maybe he's pulling our leg this whole time, or maybe he had faith in his calculations. I don't know. And then we get to this image of the multifarious beast. So we got to argue with the person who still thinks the unjust man, who tricks everybody else into thinking that he's just, is the happiest. And he says, no, the way you persuade people out of that is you say, look, if you've got this big shell that looks like a human, and it contains a human and a lion and a multifarious beast, inside you, the human has to be in control. And if you're stealing money, then it's really feeding the beast in there, and it's really making you worse off. And then he kind of goes on these arguments saying all these traditional rules that we've had are about preventing the corruption of your soul. It's not about protecting the strong in any way. So it's all everything happens in here, and then that's kind of where he ends it. He says that this this person, if you're thinking about the ideal city, it doesn't matter if it ever existed, doesn't matter if it will exist. It's all about taking charge of the city inside yourself and reconciling your competing elements in order to find kind of true temperance and happiness, which I think is sort of like, it is beautiful. I think that is a beautiful end to the argument, whether or not you believe it. And I like how we do finally have this image that we can tell other people, almost like this parable or this like accessible version of the philosopher's truth. So yeah, I like how this really started to tie things together, because before it was just like, oh boy, now we have to go through these 5 different types of government. Great, but now it's all kind of starting to click again. I felt like things kind of clicked after book 5. I feel like things are kind of clicking here after book 9. In a way, I almost feel less confident in my esoteric interpretation, because I was saying maybe Thrasymachus is the real hero in the city. We're just trying to make it strong and not actually do justice. And now he's saying, well, if you turn away from the city and if we're just talking about making yourself happy, then maybe he does believe all this after all. Maybe the son of Ariston is convinced, and we should bring out the herald to tell everybody, or whatever he said. All right, that's all I got for you today. Congratulations on making it this far, 90% of the way through. 2 more videos. Gonna finish up book 10, and then you will have read one of the most famous works in all philosophy. If you enjoyed this, hit the old like button, and hit the share button, and tell somebody who needs to take control of the beast inside of them, I guess. See you tomorrow.